So this video will be talking about photosynthesis, which is described as the process by which plants, algae, and some bacteria use the energy of sunlight to drive the synthesis of organic molecules from CO2 and H2O. So the main formula for this is going to be 6CO2 plus 6H2O yields C6H12O6 plus 6O2. And this requires sunlight as a catalyst. So we'll recognize this as 6CO2, which we know plants take in carbon dioxide. 6H2O, we know that plants need water. We know that they need sunlight in order to perform these reactions, and they make sugar. In this case, they store it as starch, and they make oxygen, which we should probably know. So the first thing that we should know is what a chloroplast is. So it contains light-capturing pigments. In this case, chlorophyll is the most abundant, and it is found in leaves. So here's what a chloroplast looks like. So here we have the entire chloroplast. We have an outer membrane right here, the outer ring. The inner membrane right here is the inner ring. And we have the stroma, is this space right here inside the inner membrane. These little circle-y things are called thylakoids, and when they're stacked up, we call those grana. So we have the outer membrane, the inner membrane, thylakoids that are stacked up in grana, and the space in between the inner membrane and the thylakoids is called the stroma. So all this white space is the stroma. So we have two stages in photosynthesis. The first is the light reactions, and that's defined as an electron transport chain in the thylakoid membrane harnesses the energy of electron transport to pump protons into the thylakoid space. Now that's kind of complicated. So basically, all you have to know is energy from the sun is used to pull low energy electrons from the water. So if we look back up here, we see we have water and we have the sun. So we use the energy from the sun to get electrons from the water. Now let's go deeper into detail on the light reactions. So in order to understand the light reactions, we need to understand what chlorophyll is. Now chlorophyll is this kind of confusing little molecule, but all we need to know is that we have a hydrophobic tail right here, which is just made up of a bunch of carbons, and we have a light absorbing end here. So this is the important part. Now the chlorophyll is found in the thylakoid membrane, which if we go back to our picture of a chloroplast, remember these are our thylakoids, and this little black circle is the membrane. So we find these chlorophylls in that membrane, and what it does is it basically just harnesses energy from the sun. Now, it takes in light, and we know that leaves are green. So if we want to understand what kind of light the chlorophyll takes in, you have to remember that the color that we see is light that is not absorbed. So the chlorophyll is green. It makes the leaves green. So it takes in and absorbs red and blue light and cannot absorb green light. So it just reflects it, and that's why we see things as green. So the chlorophyll makes up things called photosystems. Now, photosystems are just multi-protein complexes, and they have two main parts to them. They have antenna complexes, and they have the reaction center. So here's a picture of a photosystem. We see we have the thylakoid membrane right here. So this space is the thylakoid membrane. And then we have an antenna complex here, an antenna complex here, and the reaction center right here in the middle. So basically what happens is we have sunlight come in and it hits the antenna complexes. So over here, and it hits over here. And what the photosystem does is it takes that sunlight that's absorbed here and it sends it into the reaction center. And this reaction center does all of the work that we really need to focus on. So let's start it out. We have the thylakoid space here and stroma down here. First, we have light that hits photosystem 1, comes in and hits the antenna complexes, and this gives the reaction center the energy to take an electron from water. So we have water up here. The water comes through, energy from the reaction center takes an electron out, and oxygen is made. So water turns into oxygen, releases an electron into photosystem 2, and releases 4 hydrogen molecules into the thylakoid space. So that's pretty easy. That's all that happens in photosystem 2. Now this electron, it's important that we follow that. So the electron is in photosystem 2 and gets transferred over to a protein here called plastoquinone. Now it's not important that we know the name. I'm not even sure that you need to know it for the class, but plastoquinone takes this electron and transfers it over to the cytochrome. As it does this, it takes in hydrogen because the electron is negative, hydrogen is positive. So the plastoquinone takes in a hydrogen to even it out, and when it drops this electron off into the cytochrome, it also drops this hydrogen off into the thylakoid space. Now, you don't really need to understand that as long as you know that this electron gets taken from photosystem 2 to cytochrome, and a hydrogen goes from the stroma to the thylakoid space. Now, once we're done with that, the electron is in the cytochrome. The cytochrome basically just takes in more hydrogens from the stroma and releases it out into the thylakoid space. The electron doesn't really have much to do there. So it gets passed along to yet another protein called plastocyanin. Again, we don't really need to know the name, just that it takes the electron and it takes hydrogen from the stroma and pumps it out into the thylakoid space. So we have a lot of hydrogens coming out into the thylakoid space. We had 4 from the water, we had some from the plastoquinone, we had some from the cytochrome, and now we have some from the plastocyanin. Now, this electron then gets transported to photosystem 1. It's almost the exact same thing as photosystem 2. Comes here, light comes in, goes to the antenna complexes, and this gives the reaction center enough energy to take this electron and bring it down to a cute little heart-shaped protein called ferredoxin. Well, ferredoxin, I'm not sure, again, if you have to know the name, but it's important because it takes NADP plus and makes it into NADPH. So it takes hydrogen plus NADP plus and makes NADPH. So that means that NADPH is the final electron acceptor. So we have, if we look at it in the overview, big context, we had an electron that was dropped off by H2O. it goes through the electron transport chain. We get a bunch of hydrogens from the stroma that's pumped into the thylakoid space. The electron goes through the electron transport chain down to ferredoxin, where it meets up with NADPH and combines that with a NADP+, the electron comes down, meets NADP+, combines it with a hydrogen, and makes NADPH. Now we have the fun part. We have the ATP synthase, and you'll probably recognize this from cellular respiration. So I'm not entirely sure why my phone keeps cutting out. I think I am having storage problems, but let's not think about that. So left off with the ATP synthase, again, you'll probably recognize this from cellular respiration. So what's happened is, as the electron from H2O is going through the electron transport chain, hydrogens are constantly being pumped out into the thylakoid space. It happens in both of the photosystems. These two proteins bring it out. The cytochrome pumps a lot out. So we have a very uneven amount of hydrogens out in the thylakoid space than we do in the stroma. So what the ATP synthase does is it allows the hydrogens to come back and return to equilibrium. But as they move through this upper part, the hydrogens actually spin sort of a wheel type thing in the ATP synthase. So it spins and spins and creates all this energy, and the energy allows ADP to be combined with an inorganic phosphate group to become ATP. So again, there's a lot of hydrogens out here. They come in through the ATP synthase, they spin this wheel. When the wheel starts spinning, it creates energy, and the energy allows ADP to become ATP. And this is actually where the majority of ATP in photosynthesis comes from, is this one mechanism of the ATP synthase. So let's go back to the two stages. We already covered the light reactions, so let's move on to the carbon fixation cycle. This is also known as the Calvin cycle or the dark reactions. Even though dark reactions is sort of a bad term for it, a lot of people still will call it that. So let's take a look. All we need to know for the carbon fixation cycle is for every 3 molecules of CO2 that are used, 1 molecule of G3P is produced, 9 molecules of ATP are consumed, and 6 molecules of NADPH are consumed. Now the carbon fixation cycle basically just converts CO2 into sugars and occurs in the stroma. So if we go back to our picture of the chloroplast, it occurs in this space between the inner membrane and the thylakoids. Now, this again looks very confusing, but I promise you it's not. Basically, what happens in the carbon fixation cycle is we have CO2, which is a 1 carbon molecule. I'll just highlight that carbon. Gets combined with a 5 carbon molecule. Let's highlight those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And is catalyzed by rubisco. Rubisco is very, very, very important. It is probably the most abundant protein that we have on Earth. Rubisco is such a big deal because it's used in this so many times and it can't go very fast, so we have to produce a lot of it. So rubisco, very important. Remember that. Now, the CO2 in the 5 carbon molecule is catalyzed by rubisco to create a 6 carbon molecule. Now that makes sense because we have 1 carbon here, we have 5 carbons here, and now we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons here. Then, using water, we're able to split that 6 carbon molecule up into 2 molecules of 3-phosphoglycerate. Now these are 2 molecules that each have 3 carbons. That makes sense, right? Because if you have 6 carbons divided by 2, you get 2 3-carbon molecules. That's really all that we have to know. These molecules, the 3-carbon molecules at the end, can then go on to be used as starch. They're stored as starch, or they're consumed to create ATP, and that actually gets done by the mitochondria. So these can either be stored as starch, or they can go to the mitochondria and be used for cellular respiration, which I think you have already covered. So, in total, that kind of sums up photosynthesis. I know it seems like a lot, but just watch the video over and over and over again until it really starts to make sense to you. And now we can look again back at the overall equation. We have 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O catalyzed by sunlight makes sugar and 6 O2. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to just message me. I'll be happy to help you out, clarify any points that you need. Just watch this video over and over again, and I promise you'll be okay.